we talked before about the legal obligations that board members have, and one of the major responsibilities they have is developing policies for the board. And I think I forgot to, I remember showing you the Avoiding Theft booklet that we have. We also have one that's a guide for charity board members. These are both online on our webpage. We have several other publications as well. We have a pre-recorded version of the board governance webinar, and we do that every Wednesday at noon live on the first Wednesday of the month, rather. And on the third Wednesday of the month, we do one on the charitable registration system. And we are in the process of developing a number of other resources. In fact, I also mentioned before that we developed a number of coronavirus webinars. So we have stuff online about basic operational issues that we did actually with Heather. We have one on fundraising during a time of coronavirus with some fundraising experts. We have one on when you might be considering mergers or sale of property or dissolutions of an organization, or trying to change the use of restricted funds. So those are up there. Again, things that might come out of this pandemic situation that we find ourselves in. So there are particular legal issues that you have to be mindful whenever you're doing that. If you want to talk more about that, throw something in the chat area, which I've just lost. Let's see.
You should just be able to mouse over the bottom of your screen and it should pop up.
Nothing pops when I do that.
What about your second screen?
My screen is tired, apparently. So yeah, okay, now I have it. Apparently it just drops out periodically. So this whole concept about boards are there to develop the policy for an organization, and this particularly applies whenever you have staff. And so the job of boards is to make some of those big picture determinations, and then it's the job of staff members to implement and execute those plans. It's not the job of the board to be looking over the shoulder of the executive director and telling them what kind of envelopes to buy. That's not a board issue, and board members shouldn't be calling and talking to staff members about how things are going. That can be very awkward. So it's this delicate balance that needs to take place. And developing various policies, depending on what kind of organization you have, could be a wise thing to do. And again, all of it needs to be mindful of this unique role that boards have in this American system of charities in really guiding the direction of these charitable organizations. And I think it's fascinating to read about kind of the history of charitable organizations throughout our nation's history, which is actually goes well before the formation of our country. And the first charities that popped up, the first charitable organizations, was a trading company, the Massachusetts Bay Trading Colony. And so there were some hiccups along the way. And then the biggest ones that started taking over were religious ones. And their connection to the development of universities, developing universities here in the United States, pre-United States. And so there were some real unusual, we're still figuring out how to make sure that charities are operating in the best way possible. And we have this common law authority, which is rooted in that 1601 Statute of Charitable Uses provision that I mentioned early on. where the AG has the authority to force trustees to do the right thing. But it also talks about, how is it that we know when a charity is working well? What does it look like? And so there were some real early struggles between church leaders, like the clerical groups, who the churches often were the ones that were sponsoring and allowing the development of universities here in North America. So should it be the clerics that run and make decisions about academic issues for some of these universities, or should it be people out in the field who are experts in certain areas? Like, should it be legal experts? And so there were some real battles going on about, who gets to make the call. And so through all these trials and attempts early on, we now are where we are today with this enhanced understanding of what fiduciary duties look like, as well as outlining with broad terms, because every charity in Ohio is different, but the job duties are just the same. Like, it is the board's job to make sure that accountability is there and that there's integrity in the way that your organization operates. When you lose your integrity, it's something that you can't buy back. And so for that reason, it is so important for organizations to have boards that are making policies, making sure they're being followed, coming up with ideas for new ways to do things. And in fact, one of the things I did over our brief break, if you were in the earlier gathering, and I think everyone was, there was a $65,000 theft and criminal charges have been lodged against someone in Southwest Ohio from a band booster group. And the reporter wanted to know, how could the Attorney General's office let this happen? And I wish there was a formula to make sure that it won't happen, that we could press some button and, ensure that boards are living up to their obligations and having internal controls and all those things in place to better protect against this sort of thing. So you will sleep a lot better at night if you have boards that are adopting policies, and that if there are staff, they're following them and doing things the right way. Only takes this much more work. It only takes a marginal amount of additional work to make sure you're doing things right with checks and balances and that sort of thing. But it buys you a whole lot of sleep at night so that you can avoid going through the heartbreak of some of those situations when things go wrong. And again, when you're on the board, if you think you have a juicy issue and it's not clear how you ought to respond, seek out some professional help. There is nothing wrong with doing that, and it can be really a helpful way to move forward. People on boards, they can't be experts at everything, and so, setting aside time and getting information from experts can be the exact right thing to do. So we often have folks that, ask us, how should I decide whether I want to be on a board or not? What are some of those things I ought to be taking a look at? Here are some of them that I think are no-brainers. First of all, what does the organization do? If it's a cause that you really don't care about, if it's about a cat shelter, you're allergic to cats and you don't really care about them, it's not worth the time and effort that doing the job right requires, just so you can say you've been on a board. Wait to find something that aligns with your personal values and your interests. And if you can't mark that off the list, then there's no reason looking even further. So first of all, is it something that you can feel good about? What's the reputation of the group? When you're a board member, are you really involved? Or is this just a way to put your name on some paper to say you're on the board and you're involved, and yet Sue Smith, who started the group, is going to run off and do whatever she wants anyhow, pretending that she has your seal of approval in doing it? That's a huge problem. We also often find that people discover when they go to our research charities function on our webpage, sometimes folks look and discover that they're on the board of an organization they never knew they were a part of. So people have just lifted their names and inserted them as serving on a board because they may have a name that will attract attention and support. That's criminal fraud. So don't let that happen to you. When you serve on a board, is it a working board? Is there staff, or is it a situation in which all the board members are doing all the work? There's no staff, and when there's fundraising to be done, it's the board that's doing the fundraising. When there's a special event, it's the board that is there setting up the tables and collecting tickets, that sort of thing. That's a different kind of board than the Cleveland Clinic Foundation's board, in which they're there to fulfill a fiduciary duty. They read reports, they ask questions, but there's staff implementing their desires and their large vision plan going forward. So knowing if it's a working board, and all boards should be working, by the way, but there's a real difference when you have staff and when you don't have staff in terms of what the expectations are for being a board member. Do they have a committee structure? Is there an expectation that you serve on a committee? How many committees? Is there an expectation that you will donate to the organization? It often looks good when you can tell people that every single person on the board has made a financial contribution. Sometimes with some of the large organizations, there's a definition to what that means. It may mean a $10,000 gift to the organization. If you're like me, a $10,000 gift to an organization is going to be a barrier for me serving on the board. What kinds of unwritten rules are there about being on that board? Is there an orientation process? How do you, I would hope that if you're going to serve on the board of an organization, it's going to include a tour of a facility, a visit to programs, so that you can get a real idea of what goes on. Often you sit down and talk with the director, the CFO, if there is one. Here's what our financial reports look like. Here are the things that we particularly monitor. Here's what they mean. Sometimes you get paired with a more senior board member so that you can feel like you have an ability to jump in and provide value sooner rather than later. No one likes to be serving on a board and having to take a back seat for an extended period of time because you just don't get it. That's a horrible, helpless feeling. And so when you have recruited board members, make sure that they feel comfortable and that there's a process that they are becoming familiar with and comfortable with the way the group does work. What's the reputation of the group? Is it a group that's in trouble? Are you willing to take on those obligations when you come to the board? Are you willing to help straighten things up? Are you willing to ask the tough questions about, I'd like to take a look at your financial information. Well, we don't have any financial reports. Ding, 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 that's a red flag. But maybe it's your role to come in and help get them turned around on the right path forward. So another question that I would ask is, does this organization provide directors and officers coverage in their insurance coverage? So I was the board president of what I think is the very best food pantry in the city of Columbus. It has ecumenical roots. And when I asked about D&O policy, they said, well, we're a religious group, Beth. We just have faith that nothing bad will happen. And I said, well, I don't want to be the one with the least amount of faith, but I don't want to lose my house over what might happen here. And so we added on directors and officers coverage for a fairly minor amount. So you can talk to your insurance expert about what risks you have. And in that situation, we had people coming in and out of facility, including children. So there was high traffic and a much bigger risk. Grandmothers in a local park in a reading group don't face the same kinds of risks that an organization that is interacting with large numbers of people in a facility that you own, for instance. So talk to insurance people about what that risk might be. Who's going to serve on the board? The bylaws need to control. Sometimes the bylaws are very specific about how many people should be on the board. It will say the board must be 7 members. Sometimes it'll say between anywhere from 9 to 19. So what do your board bylaws say? And does that represent what is in the best interest of the group? Or should you take a look at your bylaws and appoint a bylaw revision committee? Because you know what, you really need more people. Like, you started out with just 5 board members. It's taken off. It's become more sophisticated, more activities. So you could use a larger group of board members to help provide guidance. Now, there are some places that have boards that may have 55 people on them. That's absurd. It's a historic accident in most times. There is no way that 55 people are going to be providing effective fiduciary oversight. So people ask, what's the ideal number? I don't know, but my guess is it's not 55. So you want to know how long the terms are. Is there a term limit? Many people think that bylaws should include a limit on terms for how long a board member can be on there. Sometimes there are, we have the founding director who often spends his or her, decades on the board of an organization. Maybe that's fine, but maybe there's a need to make sure that you are constantly getting in new ideas, new thoughts. When you have board limits, it kind of forces you to do that. The other thing to think about is diversity, which is critically important these days in 2020, given the important issues we're looking at with social justice throughout the country. It's always been important. The nonprofit community is not great about involving folks of color as board members. In fact, yesterday, and I took notes, there was a report that came out from the Institutional Shareholder Services ESG division, which is a giant consulting fund in the for-profit world. They looked at the 3,000 largest companies, and the boards of those, only 12.5% of the board seats go to people of ethnic and racial groups, even though they make up 40% of the population. 12.5%. Now, that is up from 2015, in which it was only 10%. And of the general total, only 4% are Black directors, and only 1.5% are Black women. Clearly, there are opportunities for enhancement. Now, diversity is something that's defined quite broadly. It could be the type of racial and ethnic diversity we're talking about here. Diversity also applies to age, to experiences, expertise, everything that you think about in terms of how people differ, geographic representation. These are things boards need to think about and think about strategically. Maybe you need to enlarge your board so that you can include people from a broader geographic region on your board. That's a perfect thing to do. Maybe you need to develop a plan to get younger people on your board, which is something that the national community often talks about. There's a concern about baby boomers aging out of service. Do we have enough younger people prepared to step into leadership roles with charitable organizations throughout the country, or step into leadership roles as leaders on staff on charities? It's something that lots of folks are looking at. One thing that I often have observed is we have a group that says, yeah, we want to get younger people involved and get them active. So they recruit some folks who come in excited, ready to go. They have new ideas. They voice their ideas about new perspectives, and it falls on deaf ears, and folks say, well, we've never done it that way before. If maybe that doesn't happen in Northwest Ohio, but I bet it does. That sort of response continually to younger folks and different folks is going to be quite discouraging, and it really indicates that you're not willing to change. That may jeopardize your ongoing relevance and in the long term. So the reason we want diversity on boards is because people bring different life experiences and perspectives. And so when you can have a wide variety of input, ideas, suggestions, hopefully the organization gets to a more optimal place. And so there's great value for multiple reasons to take a look at diversity. And that ought to be a strategic issue for all kinds of charitable organizations. Here's a question you ought to know about when you're considering going on a board. How does it work? How does this group operate? Well, one way you can look and get an initial idea is take a look at the bylaws. What do they say? How often does the board meet? Are there annual things? How many committees? What do the officers do? Sometimes they may not be in the bylaws, but there may be board policies and procedures about frequency, location. Are they open or closed meetings? These are things boards can also change as they go along. Is there a habit within the organization to develop agendas and share information in advance? Again, so that you can spend your time at a board meeting actually talking and sharing ideas instead of someone reading aloud from a committee report. Oh, that makes me crazy when I'm involved in board meetings like that. I'd rather poke a pen in my eye than do responsive readings of committee reports. So think about how that's set up. Think about if you're willing to endure responsive readings of committee reports. It might not be a good match for you. Take a look at past minutes. Those are the records of the meeting. How do they represent what goes on? That can give you an idea about whether you want to serve with that group, and it can also give you an idea if you're involved with the organization about things to change. And then 1702 is the Nonprofit Corporation Act. If there are questions about how a charity should operate in these times, especially if it's not included in the bylaws, take a look at 1702 because it will have default language that will say, if not in the bylaws, then a group is permitted to do X, Y, and Z. And in fact, that's where, again, I mentioned that meetings using Zoom and other teleconferencing equipment is perfectly permissible and was a huge lifesaver in these last several months. 1702 also says that you need to have at least 3 board members. So when I mentioned earlier, what's the ideal number of board members? It has to be at least 3 and probably less than 55. What kind of committees are you going to have? Some boards don't have committees. The entire board operates as the operating committees of the organization. But it's not uncommon to have a number of committees. You know, churches, PTAs, all kinds of groups have committees. Some of the most common ones, often there's an executive committee, which is made up of the officers of the organization who may meet between board meetings, put together agendas, decide what kind of information needs to be shared, what kinds of action the board needs to take. Often there'll be a finance or audit or budget committee, and they spend time taking a far more focused look at what's going on with the financial operations. This is where you would find the multiple people to be involved in internal controls. That's where you'd have someone else going in and reconciling bank accounts to make sure that what you're hearing from your treasurer is indeed accurate. And you know, trust is not an internal control, and if that's the only thing you remember from today, it will have been worth it if you do something within your organization to make sure that multiple people are involved in checking and double checking what's going on with the financial operations. Sometimes you have a fundraising committee. Fundraising is often a huge responsibility of the board, you know, whether they're individual givers. Sometimes there's an expectation that board members will bring X number of big donors to a group, or at the annual gala will sell, you know, 10 tables, tickets for 10 tables at the group. Often there's a specific fundraising committee, and they're the ones that, you know, decide when you're going to have the bake sale, the pie sale, or the concession stand at the football and basketball games. Committees are also a way to allow many people to be involved, and it's also a way to gracefully allow some people to get off the board. So folks can be very involved and committed to the organization, be involved through the committee structure, but yet not on the fiduciary board. And that's a way to allow some people to kind of step over, still being involved like they want to be, and yet not holding up things on the administrative side like the boards often handle. Let me stop here because I know we have some people who have both been on a board and others who work for a board. Have any of you experienced any challenges in board behavior that could be a helpful discussion to share with your colleagues? And we won't assume it's with your current employer. Anybody? I often find that when I'm talking to directors of charities, let's say we've got this one board member and he just is making my life miserable. He calls every day. He calls my staff every day. He inappropriately inserts himself into the operation of our organization. That's not cool. And those are the things that then you should take back to your full board. And sometimes there's a governance committee of a board that looks at how the organization is run and also how board members are doing in fulfilling their obligations. And they may indeed ask a board member to step down. You know, the human condition is always present. It's always present with everyone involved in the charitable world. And so we all have bad days and we also have weaknesses. And so charitable board members are no different. So Heather has shared the situation where the executive director was losing the confidence of the board and the board was getting more and more involved in operations. Yes, and when that happens, sometimes boards develop different strategies for trying to get to take a grasp and better understand what's going on, because in many situations the board comes in for a meeting every other month. They get great reports from the executive director. Everything is hunky-dory. It's all great. And yet it may be a very toxic work environment, and the executive director may be engaged in all kinds of, let's say not illegal activities, but is basically ruining the organization from the inside out. So many times boards will have to talk about it and perhaps do interviews with folks throughout the organization, but it's not something that boards ought to haphazardly jump into, and it certainly isn't something that board members should do ad hoc on their own. It ought to be part of a board discussion about what are we going to do. I fear we have a situation. Let's come up with a strategy that we're all going to be involved in, as opposed to, you know, here's Beth, the undercover board member who's going to go in and I know 10 people there. I'll call and ask them all what's going on. Not okay. So board members, you know, the executive director, it can be a really tough situation. A new executive director may come in and, you know, fire some very popular staff members, and maybe there's very good reason for it. It can often create some waves of panic and fear, and going to the board complaining about this person, and he or she may be doing the exact right thing. It is a delicate balance, again, that relationship between the executive director and the board. And it's not fair for executive directors to feel like they have to individually model their behavior and what they do as their job description based on preferences of 17 different people. The board needs to get their act together too to work as a cohesive unit. Here's someone who shared a situation where the board president threatened to quit when it was suggested that a volunteer be removed from a leadership position because she was not following organization guidelines. Oh, I'm sorry. Often there's this attitude that you can't fire volunteers. You absolutely can and should. Sometimes it is the only thing to eliminate dysfunction within an organization. If board members, volunteers can't follow the rules, it jeopardizes the integrity of that organization. So assuming everything, there weren't any other crazy things, it seems as if they were exactly what happened, but again, it's not easy. Heather is sharing, I read about a situation on a listserv where the board had a practice of inviting the executive director to the beginning of a board meeting to present their report, then was excused for the remainder of the board meeting. Well, that's an interesting situation because it seems as if the executive director is going to be the one that has access to the most information that the board ought to be using as the basis for making its decisions. So there's nothing about that sounds normal. Here's another one from Patty, where she's heard of a board president doesn't want to follow procedures and does not accept suggestions from the executive director. Yes, and it's quite a risky undertaking at times for an executive director to tell their board president, you know what, you're really messing things up, because that executive director's job is on the line with those very people who may be not living up to their responsibilities in an appropriate way. That is always delicate. Sometimes what I think is you have to be very strategic and know who you're talking about. Sometimes that means knowing of other board members who might share your same concerns, getting advice from them who may bring the board around in the proper direction. Sometimes you might want to bring in Beth Short or some other consultant that's not internal to do a training with the board member and kind of saying, this is the way things need to operate. And if you're not committed to doing that, then you're really a hindrance to this organization. So move out the door. These are things that there's no right answer to. They're so hard because they deal with the human condition. This is also an area where one of the things we don't do well, except maybe in Northwest Ohio, is look at leaders of other charities as resources as opposed to having them only look like competitors for funding. Pick up the phone and talk to someone. Talk out what's going on. Brainstorm ideas. There may be someone who's been through the same thing. Maybe someone knows this person. Maybe they can sit down and have coffee with them. These are the things that are far more difficult to deal with because there's no books on the right way of doing that. We know what financial reports ought to look like and how you ought to look at them and read them. Dealing with egos is surely a different undertaking, and it can be sometimes the hardest part of the job. Thank you for sharing those notes. Well, let's jump into what you may be tired of hearing me talk about is financial policies and internal controls. And again, that is job number one, top job responsibility, making sure there are policies in place that deal with the financial operations of the organization, whether it's dealing with folks money's coming in the door or money's going out the door, budgets, paying your bills, if there's audits, what is the position of the organization? Is the board there making suggestions about new and improved ways of doing things? And are those policies being followed? Now, sometimes, for instance, I mentioned that I'm getting these media calls about this case in southwestern Ohio. How do you respond to cases involving fraud or some other crisis? Boards should have policies. And again, how it works is going to vary based on the size of the organization, whether it's a working board or a fiduciary board. First of all, have a crisis communication plan in place before you need it. Who's going to be speaking to the media on behalf of your organization? You don't want every staff member to be providing their own comments to the Toledo Blade or whoever your local television stations might be up there. Generally better if there's one spokesperson, and this can apply to a situation involving fraud or some emergency that happens, heaven forbid. Have a plan in place. Fraud is one of those things that we never want to deal with, the thefts and sort of thing. Often, if a board has a zero tolerance policy on theft and fraud, it sends a real message to the organization. It says, you will be fired and we will file a police report. That's generally some of the prongs of a zero tolerance policy. It lets everyone know we take it seriously and we're not going to permit it in our situation. Sometimes I become surprised to learn of situations in which there's been a theft and the organization continued to allow that person to be employed, and like, oh, but he's so nice. Yes, he stole $65,000, but he's so nice. Another thing we often do is when we have these situations arise is we think that if we file a police complaint that will lead to bad publicity for our organization. And so we just quietly let them go, and that person ends up with another charity and does the exact same sort of damage. And so we keep passing around this bad coin. Whereas, if the media coverage is going to happen, you can say, we discovered this problem, we took action as soon as we found out, we fired the person, we filed a police report, and by the way, if you're hoping to make an insurance claim, generally they will require that a police report be filed. So it allows you also a way to firmly respond, which creates the impression that, yeah, this bad thing might have happened, but you're on track to make sure it doesn't happen again. Maybe you need to hire a lawyer. If you've been approached and an employee has shared information that Heather, who's the executive director maybe, is engaged in this huge fraudulent scheme, misusing IT funds, buying laptops and reselling them, you on the board may say, we're going to hire a lawyer to look into this. They may do the investigation. They will help guide the next steps. One of the first things you want to be mindful of is protecting the assets so that there's no additional damage done in the meantime while you're making an investigation to try to figure out what happened, to piece things together, because it can take a while to put together all the pieces. You also want to be cautious about, calling Heather into the office and saying, you're a thief and we're firing you. There are some implications for how you want to interact with employees. So think about hiring counsel or a forensic accountant when those sorts of things come up. I pray they don't, because they're giant headaches. You can also think about filing a complaint with our office. Sometimes our civil authority is used in trying to help recover funds that might have been misappropriated. Often that's a condition when there's criminal prosecutions of cases. So think through what kinds of activities your organization is engaged in, and what might go wrong, and develop a plan for how you might respond. And so then you don't have to run around like crazy should that black day ever arise. One of the things that can often end up in the paper in a way that is not complimentary is conflict of interest issues. The public seems to have a good interest in this, particularly when it applies to public officials, for instance. So they're very familiar with conflict of interest. While you may follow a conflict of interest policy where, Beth's builders got the contract to build the gazebo for the bandstand and she's on the board, you did it exactly right, following all the laws about how that's handled. If the public gets the impression that the board is just dealing contracts to all the board members around the table, even if it's done exactly right, that perception can be very damaging to the organization. So be mindful. of not only are you living up to the spirit of conflict of interest issues, but does it look like things are a bit too insular and it's becoming just an internal club in which there's personal benefit to those who are part of that club? Whistleblower protection, mentioned that several times. Some groups rather, outsource and make employees aware of, call 1-800, phone in a fraudster, because they want to make sure there's some avenue to get the information from those that know about the fraud to the board who needs to take action on it. Sometimes the fraudster is the executive director, who may say, if any of you ever communicate with a board member, you will be immediately fired. Well, there are many good reasons why you don't want staff members running to individual board members. That just creates chaos. But also, it's a way to create pressure and fear, so that if there is fraud going on, people are too afraid to report it. So make sure that there is a pathway where if something is going wrong, that the people that need to know about it will be able to find out about it. If you have staff, there's countless things you need to make sure is being done in the right way. Just like anyone else handling employees, you need to make sure that all the tax stuff, insurance stuff, all those things are being handled properly. Again, the responsibility for board members to provide oversight of the executive director, that includes doing evaluations. If the board isn't satisfied with the performance of an executive director, it's only fair that he or she receive some notice. What does it look like to those board members to have a great executive director? And if there's not a shared understanding, then no wonder there are problems. So you need to have those kinds of discussions with your executive director so he or she can know how to improve and how to satisfy the areas of concern. Don't forget that volunteers, while they're not paid by your organization, you got to think about volunteer management policies. I mean, there are certain laws that control the operations of many types of volunteer activities. For instance, those working with children, where there may be a requirement to have background checks and that sort of thing. You need to make sure that your volunteer management program is up to par and following all the kinds of rules that contribute to the integrity of your organization. And if there's a volunteer that can't manage to do that, then you need to part ways. Fundraising policies. What kind of things are you willing to accept and what kinds of things are you not willing to accept? I was on a board and found out through an embarrassing accident that our organization had been gifted a car by someone before I came on the board. There had been no notice of this provided by the executive director to the board, and she transferred the title to a client of the board who was low income, needed transportation. That in itself, not necessarily problematic. However, 2 or 3 years pass and the original owners, the donors, get a letter from the city of Columbus about unpaid parking tickets. They ask, why am I getting bills for unpaid parking tickets? Why wasn't this properly transferred, the title? Well, it hadn't been done appropriately. And so the board then adopted a policy that we were not going to accept cars, boats, things that come with titles. And we wanted notice whenever that came in from the executive director so we would know about that. So those are the kinds of things that you might want to think about. And Heather is sharing a great resource with the Toledo Bar Association and their Nonprofit Connect program, where maybe you can get some answers on some questions. What kinds of fundraising activities will your organization embrace? So I worked for a couple years. I was the statewide director of marketing and communications for the American Cancer Society. We had very strong policies that restricted the acceptance of any money connected with a tobacco interest, and they religiously followed this policy. So, for instance, there's a giant craft food warehouse here in Columbus. We didn't accept any gifts from the craft food warehouse because they were part of the under the Philip Morris umbrella. So through their Relay for Life programs. So one time someone wanted to do a fundraiser, and in fact it was in Toledo, at some sort of cigar lounge. So it's like I had to call and say, thank you for your interest, but the American Cancer Society logo does not go next to the logo of a cigar lounge. That kind of defeats the purpose of our tobacco-free position that we really adhered to. We also had people who were very enthusiastic about breast cancer research, and so they wanted to do a topless car wash for us. And we said, thank you for your enthusiasm, but American Cancer Society logo is not going to go next to topless car wash. So you as the leaders of a charity have the authority to control the use of your name and what types of activities people can do making use of your name. And in fact, as Abby mentioned this morning, if someone is going to raise money on your behalf, they need to have advance permission. And for American Cancer Society, with the Relay for Life funding stream of revenue, where people are doing all kinds of crazy creative things, but we made an effort to try to keep connected and know what people were doing so that we could say, hold on, no topless car washes. I don't know what they do today about topless car washes, but several years ago, that wasn't something that we were encouraging. So those are things that the board needs to talk about. Do you have adequate control in knowing how your name is being used and presented throughout the community in terms of fundraising issues? Periodically, you ought to go online and check to make sure that people aren't raising funds for you that you didn't know about. We find this all the time. And frankly, people are willing to make use of the good name of an organization and raise funds that never get to the charity. So if you become aware of people raising funds on your behalf, you have every right to, first of all, you should let us know if you have problems, but you ought to reach out and say, whoa, we need to talk about what's going on. And maybe you say cease and desist. That's an okay decision. Or maybe you sit down and say, well, these are the expectations we have. This is how it needs to be done. We will approve this should we have this shared expectation of how it's going to be done. You can sometimes become surprised over efforts that people have undertaken that you had no idea happened, and you never saw the benefit of any of those dollars raised. I mean, it just was, unfortunately, a way that it's a way that some people take advantage of the generosity of others. So you need to be proactively scanning your community and knowing what's going on. When you accept gifts, do you have a way to make sure that you're acknowledging those gifts? If I'm interested in taking deductions on my taxes, I'm going to need to have written verification. It's not going to count that I have my canceled check for $500. I need to have a letter from the charity saying I gave them $500. The IRS lays that out pretty smoothly at irs.gov if you need to look there for some guidance. Another thing that can be very popular is to assure people through your webpage or otherwise that you protect the privacy of your donors. Some charities sell their donor lists, so they are used by professional solicitors to raise funds for other charities. Is that something you want to do, or is that something you want to brag about to your community, that you value donor support and you protect their information and don't sell lists? Do you have an intake process for gifts in kind? Gifts in kind is an issue where it's non-monetary gifts that an organization is accepting, and that plays an important role for many different kinds of charities. Food pantries, clothing rooms, run, very heavily dependent on contributions of gifts in kind. You want to make sure that you have a process for accepting those and that they're being used by the charity and not walking out the door with someone else. It's also important because they need to be accounted for. There are organizations that often use gifts in kind as a way to kind of pad their financial reports so that it looks as if the organization is spending far more money on program service expenses than for administrative costs or fundraising costs. We see this happening on a national level with a lot of large organizations where they may, in their books, say that they have received gifts in kind worth $4 million, for instance. Often it's pharmaceuticals. So what price is a fair price to put on pharmaceuticals that may be expired or not very useful? So if they use an inflated value for that, and they may or may not even use or put to use these gifts in kind, but it's a way to pad, and they gift those out in some way, transfer them to another group even, it creates an artificial percent of program service givings because it lowers the impact of high expenses. And it's done actually in a fraudulent manner to confuse donors about what really is happening in a charity. So if you get a lot of gifts in kind, you can really throw things off. And getting a lot of gifts in kind, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're just collecting things and passing them from group to group to group with just a paper trail and they don't ever use them, that's fraud. And the FTC and a number of AGs have been involved in taking action against a number of those kinds of cases. So just be mindful that that's something that can go on around you. Gifts in kind can be really important, but they also need to be accounted for just like any other kind of gift to your organization. Are there regulatory requirements that affect your group? Boards really need to know that. If you start accepting a number of grants from governmental entities, there may well be expectations about how you will treat those gifts, how you will account those funds, how you account for them, how you document beneficiaries of those funds, the people that you serve. And it can take you unexpectedly into areas you might not have previously understood. So you may suddenly find yourself needing to live up to HIPAA requirements. You may suddenly find yourself, while you used to be a food pantry and gave away canned food, if you start having hot soup every day, you may have bought yourself into being under some health department regulations that might not have previously been a concern. So know about the work of your organization and what things might pop up. I mentioned earlier the importance of cybersecurity policies. We had one charity that shared with me at a training that someone came in to interview for a job, and they got to the receptionist desk and said, "Could you help me? My resume is on here. I dropped it out in the parking lot in a mud puddle. Could you print this off for me?" Receptionist takes this drive, plugs it into her computer, and says, "Absolutely." Plugs it in, prints one off, and off they go to the interview. This was intentionally loaded with a virus that infected the entire system of computers there. So you have to be, unfortunately, on your toes at all times. And, we need to worry about that at home. And charities, unfortunately, we wish that cyber criminals would get a conscience, but they don't appear to distinguish between charities, businesses, or anyone else. So please think about that. There are some things that I think are really helpful for boards to do, board practices. And I think at the beginning of every program year, that's a chance to recalibrate. I suggest that you do kind of an annual checkup at that first board meeting. Update your conflict of interest policies, the disclosure forms. Make sure that there's a timeline for the year. Review the bylaws. Are we accounting for everything we've promised the public that we're going to do? Do we know what policies we have in place? Do we have goals for the year? Sometimes boards will decide to focus in a particular year on certain types of policies. We're going to use this year to update our HR policies. It's time we take a look. We value employee retention. We just got through a period where the Wicked Witch of the West was the executive director. We lost a lot of people. Now we have good people on board. Let's take a look to make sure that we're doing what we can to retain good people. Sometimes you may not have an expert on HR issues on your board. Sometimes it's difficult to, at a given time, recruit someone on the board to lead, to volunteer to step forward to lead as a board member. Sometimes they're afraid it's going to be a lifetime sentence. This is an opportunity to perhaps go to a local company and say, we're looking to update our HR policies. Do you have someone from your HR department that you could loan to us as a consultant to kind of help guide us through this process? Many times companies are willing to do that. It creates a good experience for folks. There's a beginning and an end. It's not something that goes on forever like board service can sometimes feel like. And so that's a good way to get some high quality consulting things. You may want to hire a consultant to help. You may need to hire a lawyer to help. So knowing what you're going to be looking at for the year, that could be something that you develop at your annual checkup at the beginning of the year. Maybe you decide that you want to prepare to do a strategic plan where you're going to look at 3 to 5 years down the line about what kind of services you provide. What are the needs in the community? Is that service needed anymore? Are there other people providing that particular service, but there's a gap over here that maybe is a gap that we can fill in our community. And you prepare for strategic planning. It's not something you just sit down and do. It requires, a commitment to hard thinking and really focused thinking. I feel very bad for people that put together strategic plans last year because I assure you, no one predicted 2020 was going to end up being like it is now. And so sometimes there are things that arise that, it's out of the control of all of us. And we're just going to have to regroup and decide how we best operate on the short term and then how we operate in the long run as well. I think I've been reading, as I'm sure many of you have been, about, what are the estimates for when we return to normal. I don't know that we'll ever fully return to normal in terms of life like it was in February when we were just blissfully happy in the gray days of Ohio winters. People have had to make a number of adjustments, and so many of us have found these online platforms, and in some cases charities have been able to serve even more people than before. Telehealth has exploded as a way to provide services for people. Those may well be changes that are adapted into the long run so that they never disappear. And those will be good things, and I think good boards are going to be thinking about that and wanting to make sure that they're providing cutting-edge services on cutting-edge problems. These are tough times, but boards need to be thinking strategically, and sometimes that's hard to do when you're just running in place as fast as you can to try to keep up with the day-to-day operations. Sometimes you got to take time to sit down take a deep breath and do some focused thinking about next steps forward. And I think that's going to be critically important over the next 12 months for charities because, frankly, I think that it's going to be a while before we return to life as we knew it before in throwing giant parties. So COVID parties are actively discouraged in Columbus, and I'm guessing in Toledo as well. So there are limitations to what we do and how we do it these days. They will disappear. In fact, so I've been working at home since March. We learned recently that our section and several other sections, we are working from home permanently now. So I don't love it, but it's a way. The analysis has been that the staff members have been even more productive at home than they have been in the office, that there has not been we're able to provide the same services working remotely that we have been in the office. And it's also no secret that the state budget is in terrible shape right now. And so working from home and releasing office space that we don't have to pay rent on is a critical way to save money. And businesses are going through this kind of analysis right now, and so will charities. So this is a change that, I'm not sure that there's anything that's ever permanent when it comes to state government, but I've been instructed, and hundreds of us have, to clean out our offices, take everything home. And so I am now permanently working at home, which is so disappointing to me because I really crave being around people. So, like, from the very beginning of the coronavirus situation, I would go to fast food drive-thrus because that was the best way to have face-to-face connections with another human being, because I was craving human connection so badly. So there are changes, and it's going to be only the creative charities that can be thinking through, forward, and into a future that looks different that are going to survive. Board members and folks with your staff, take a look at the way your organization communicates what it does to the public. How does your webpage look? If you look at the webpage, do you understand what the organization does? Do you understand how to get services? Do you understand how to volunteer or to give? Does it all come together as a cohesive message? When you look at the webpage, does it reflect a diverse community of people involved in the activities of the organization? You may want to engage in program delivery evaluation. You evaluate your executive director. Hopefully the executive director wants some evaluation on how services are. What do people think who make use of the programs? Heather will be distributing an evaluation about this training, and that's because she wants to better understand what is most helpful to the folks that she's trying to serve. So she's going to want to know, is this information helpful? Is this way of delivering it helpful? I so much would rather be there in person with you all. You would, my delightfulness does not show through on Zoom like it otherwise would, but we're doing the best that we can now. But examining how you deliver services, is it valued by your clients? And maybe even taking a look at what do folks outside of your organization think about your organization. How easy is it to work with your charity? Or if you're serving the poverty community, how do other key players in the poverty community think your organization performs? How easy is it to work with you? Do they have suggestions for how you could improve? Can they link you up with someone who's doing something a bit differently with another charity that they work with? So again, coming together with other charities is the way to get a bigger bang for the buck when we work together. Obviously, you're going to do your HR evaluations, make sure that that's happening. But in really good groups, boards are evaluating themselves. How is each member of the board doing in living up to their legal obligations to the group? And how is the board as a whole living up to its obligations to the group? And sometimes you'll find that, a board member says, look, I can tell I've missed X number of meetings and I didn't attend and I didn't go to a single committee meeting. Then maybe it's a chance to have a candid discussion. Maybe this isn't a good match for you. Maybe this isn't a good time for you. And you can maybe circulate someone off the board. This is also a good way to find out whether there are holes in the board makeup that you can adjust for in bringing in some new board members from different geography, different area of expertise, accounting for diversity of all sorts in terms of the board membership. So great boards are always looking at evaluating that sort of thing in terms of how it can be more impactful for the organization as a whole. The great thing is, years ago, because I'm old, there didn't used to be a whole lot of information about how to do a great job running a charity. It was kind of, we were those do-gooders that, people just kind of ignored. But over time, people have learned that, there's a significant portion of the U.S. economy that rests on the shoulders of the nonprofit community. So if you're just a bean counter and that's all you care about, it's worth paying attention to those beans. And so now there's all kinds of resources out there available online. If you Google it, books in the library, all kinds of tools to help charities learn more about trends, adapt to trends, set up all kinds of efforts to enhance performance, enhance your services that you're providing, which is what usually excites everybody about being on the board. So let me throw it open. Tell me about, do you all work with boards that do all these sorts of things? Or tell me something, either turn off your, unblock yourself and shout out loud. What are some experiences you've had with boards about when they do things well and when they're hardly doing things? Anybody willing to share? Come on. Okay, so how many have worked with boards and you are confident that they all read the materials before they get to the board meeting? Anybody have frustrations because board members don't read the materials before they get to a board meeting? And when you're a staff person, you just want to scream sometimes saying, I had other things I could have done instead. It's like board members, you can't live with them and you can't live without them. You don't do that just as an exercise. Like, you send these things out and you expect board members to read the materials. And sometimes maybe you need your president or someone else to deliver that message and remind people, please take a look at these. Sometimes it seems like the fiscal operations of an organization are what people tend to get most nervous about. So maybe you solve what can be frustrating board meetings where questions go on and on by having a pre-board meeting, maybe, which is more of a step-by-step review of the financial reports, what they represent, what they mean, and also perhaps a chance for people to get their questions answered in advance instead of coming to the board meeting totally cold and taking up a lot of time that could better be used. Certainly they have a right to get answers to their questions, but if it's interfering with the flow of how the meeting runs and the way to make the best use of board assets, think about different ways around that. Oh, good. Someone shared something about school boards. 2 school board meetings at a school that she worked with last year. Never served on a board myself, but I keep thinking, why didn't they do that as I learned more about boards? Yes. So people on school boards, oh my gosh, what a difficult job that is these days. I would not want to be the ones making decisions about how school is going to be delivered in these troubled times. You also sometimes get to see great fights on school boards and city council where people are accusing each other of hiding information. Let's say that can happen in the public sector with the governmental groups. And I'd like to think that when we're serving on charitable boards, we are all there for the same purpose and not trying to advance any political agenda of any sort. And so we're all behaving and acting in a very upright fashion, committed to the mission. And I say that knowing that, again, the human condition is always there. Someone else is sharing that sometimes there's a lack of questions and a lack of advocacy. Yeah, it's very difficult and disappointing to go to a board meeting and it just seems as if the executive director is just rotely moving through items of business, no questions, all in favor, aye, next item. You know, it's okay if that particular issue has been on the agenda for the last 3 months of meetings and they've been, you know, learning about it, discussing it, and they feel confident in knowing all the details, the pros, the cons, the risks, the benefits, and they're just ready for this meeting in September where they're going to finally take a vote on it and the vote goes very quickly. That's really different than where you have a situation where you have a guess that the board members don't know what they're voting on. That's actually a breach of their fiduciary obligations, and board members can be held accountable for that sort of behavior. When we discover fraud that has been going on within an organization, sometimes it's because of the board's lack of attention, and sometimes we involve them in our investigations because sometimes people are blissfully ignorant and knowing exactly what's going on. So don't do that. Don't be that person, and don't let those sorts of things happen when you're involved with an organization. You need to have the active involvement of folks. And many times, if you're a staff member, you're excited when people are active and engaged and they care enough to ask questions and share ideas about how things might be done. And, you know, having a little bit of give and take done in a respectful manner can really be a helpful way in coming up with what is sometimes a better resolution or approach that hadn't even been considered. Any other thoughts, ideas?
So Beth, it's been a while. It's been a while since we've had this managing up, managing down with boards. Julia Clausen, I don't know if anybody on the call had trained with her. By the way, can you stop the screen share and we'll switch to gallery view? Great. Let me just, okay. So when Julia was here, she was talking about, and I'm going to simplify what she said in a workshop day. This is what I took away. Is that she was advocating for a partnership where you have a board chair and you have an ED and you come together both with your expertise and you work together. Sometimes, and Beth, maybe you can comment on this, sometimes it starts to tilt. If this is the ED over here, the ED is really starting to do governance work, really starting to run the organization, and this group, the board, is starting to let off the gas a little bit. And then you really want to come back. On the other hand, there's a situation where the board is starting to, this is that losing confidence scenario possibly, where the board is now getting way over involved in operations because they don't have the confidence that the ED is going to do the job. So what, I'm going to throw one out there, Beth. What if we send people to breakout rooms for 5 minutes and you guys can talk amongst yourselves about your experience with either being on a board or on a staff or anything you may have heard somebody, because we all know somebody who's served on these things, particularly if they like to complain, right? So how about we take 5 minutes and then we'll come back and we'll just chat about what we were chatting about, okay? All right, so we're gonna meet you, you're gonna be over in the breakout rooms.
Virus, that was certainly something that many groups had to make use of. However, that should be the default. It shouldn't be the permanent way of operation. And if you're another board member who's not on the executive committee, and yet these 4 people are off making all the decisions and all the calls, why do they need me? You're really jeopardizing having the ongoing buy-in of other people who have already, stood up and said, count me in, I want to be involved. And so if you are a staff member and that becomes the preference of the officers, what might you do? I think I'd have an open discussion about that and say, look, we are, this could impact us in all kinds of ways, including fundraising, which we cannot afford in these, really rocky times. We can't afford to not having lots of people involved and feeling like their input is vitally needed. So often that is caused when there are some perhaps dysfunctional people who want to maintain control and have big egos. I'm just making a guess. And that's a dysfunction that you have to think about broadly. And again, I think finding a trusted board member who might not be in that executive group to raise those issues for consideration for the whole board, where it's not just you as a staff member talking about it, but saying, what am I, chopped liver? I'm out here on the board and I didn't sign off on these things, and I'd like to know the basis by which you did it, and now's when we should be working together. Inconsistent board engagement, yes, and board engagement, a popular thing. But again, that issue is, do I as a board member even feel that it matters? Is my involvement, what am I getting out of it? Am I having a feeling of satisfaction that I'm contributing in some substantive way to the work of an organization that's making a difference? If I feel that each time, I'm going to want to continue to be engaged in a deep way. If I'm coming to a board meeting to listen to, I was on one board where this woman, oh my goodness, she wanted to micromanage the executive director in a way that was totally inappropriate. And she was rather loud and obnoxious. And it wasn't something that the executive director could say, like, Janet, you're being a jerk. It was something that, other colleagues needed to say, like, this is an inappropriate question, in this forum at this point in time. And we have more important things to do, Janet, than to query her over where she buys her envelopes and what kind of envelopes she buys. It's like, I do not want to spend my time being engaged in that kind of, small-minded, detail, control freak kind of thing. So you need to have, some other folks on the board. And if you don't have them now, go out and find them, people that you respect, people that can be a good release valve for you, someone to give you feedback about, hey, don't know if you noticed, but Janet seemed to get really ruffled during this part of the meeting, and it could be worth, smoothing things over with her afterwards. It's always great to get that kind of feedback. And again, this is all just, the magic of having relationships and learning how to work with people effectively. And sometimes it goes wrong, and you just do the best that you can and try to do better moving forward.
So I have 2 questions. What does board engagement mean? I think everyone would have a slightly different answer. So what do you think board engagement means?
That's a tough one.
It is a tough one. That's why I'm asking, because I get inquiries all the time, like, my board is not engaged. Well, what do you want them doing that they're not doing? You have to be really clear and explicit about what the ask is. I see a few people madly typing. Yeah,
Danielle has a good one there. that's what I think of, is where you have board members who are engaged. They show they're interested, they ask questions, and they want to contribute. But I do think Heather makes a good point in that, I go around and do board governance training, and there are sophisticated organizations that all of you have heard of that have a nationwide footprint, in which the board members, they haven't spent time talking about what does it mean to be a board member, what does a good board do, because they've been asked to be on this group because of their name, because that they are interested in this topic, because they have a family member perhaps who deals with a certain situation. But we don't take time often in these situations to talk about, we know that, we want to fight juvenile diabetes, but we don't talk about what does it mean to be a great board member, and what is it that the board can accomplish, and are there ways to move forward? So someone says they ought to be advocating for the organization. They should be, but sometimes people don't know how to do that. And so we need to make time to have clear discussions and training. Fundraising responsibility is something that scares away many board members. And I was talking to an executive director earlier this week who was talking about, I go out and beg for money. And I said, well, I prefer to say, rather than begging, I like to provide an opportunity for people to invest in great work that changes people's lives. He goes, no, I'm comfortable calling it begging. Having
point, particularly in the fundraising area, because they're volunteers, right? So what are the trainings, the expectations, and the limitations that you want to put around board members who are fundraising? So what is engagement? It's really a trick question, because it's whatever your organization defines. So to your point, Beth, if you don't have a job description or position description for your board members and all of your executive team, that you are ripe for misunderstanding and misalignment right off the bat. If you're someone who's just happy, I've heard this so many times, I just want a living, breathing board member. Do you really? Do you really want someone who may or may not show up? To me, I want a really rigorous set of expectations. And if your answer is no, I respect you for that, but I'm going to keep moving, because this is what I need to run our organization. And I don't need someone who's an ineffective board member taking up a seat and then having to deal with the removal, whatever that is. That's, I think, the worst case scenario.
Drama.
Where you have to move somebody out.
Big drama. So when I worked for the American Cancer Society, they did, and I think it was just, was it just in Ohio that we created it? But we had this program that we trained. It was a very short training. It took like 20 minutes or so. And now I can't, it was called something like I'm Glad You Asked. And the idea was to give everybody a way to quickly respond when you have an opportunity to talk about what the organization does. And so, anytime you were able to give an elevator speech or you got asked something by someone in the community, they were trained to say, American Cancer Society provides research, education, advocacy, and service to people dealing with cancer. And that was like the automatic response, with the assumption being that that's like just giving your brain time to put together the next answer. And what I find the most exciting about the American Cancer Society is the cutting edge research. And did you know that 32 researchers have received the Nobel Peace Prize for their work? Or whatever it might be that excited someone. So we gave people these tools that were really easy to use. We did a role play. We did it for board members. We did it for staff people. And so it was a way to tell folks it is easy to talk about the American Cancer Society, and you can use that for fundraising purposes, for doing public advocacy, because they did a lot of health policy work. Some people think that calling your Congress member or your city council member or your state senator, that you shouldn't call their offices unless you know all the details about a particular bill that you might want them to pass. Absolutely not. You just need to, and I have been in trainings where Everyone take out your cell phone. I want you to go to this website. Type in your address. It's going to tell you who your state senator is. Oh, look there. Now a phone number pops up. Everyone press this button, and right now I want you to call and tell them that you're concerned about Senate Bill 16 that provides, mammograms to low-income people or whatever it is. And then people, they spend like 3 minutes on the phone. It's like, well, that wasn't horrible. It was very doable, and it allows people to feel more comfortable taking the next steps forward. So those are things that, are worth spending time on, and they're fun. And you can get better and better at doing it.
So we've done some research at the center about understanding how many nonprofits there are. How many board roles do you think there are in Lucas Wood and Fulton? So Greater Toledo, how many board roles do you think there are? And type in your guess in the chat box. You're muted, Kelly. Talk to someone else. Okay. It's tough being an ED, isn't it, Kelly? Come on, you guys, guess.
We've got tens of thousands, which I think could be a very good guess.
Anybody else? So we don't, any more final guesses? 16,000, okay. So we don't exactly know. We're in the process of trying to get this more detailed, because we also want to look at connections among board members, and we're looking at that. But let's just play a little assumption games. If there's roughly 3,500 nonprofits, and they legally have to have at least 3, there's 10,500 right there. And I think it's safe to assume that there's a fair number that would have 5 or 6, right? And there's some of the big ones have like 25, 30 people, 36 people on a board. Like, I don't even know how that runs, but that's another whole workshop, right? I do not think 30,000 is very far off the mark, quite frankly. So why do I bring that up? How hard is it, or how easy is it for you to recruit board members? Not easy. Anybody else? Anybody figure this out? Pickings are slim. Difficult. Yeah, so what makes it, so one is literally there's a lot of asks out there, right? What else makes it challenging? I'll use the word challenging. What is it that makes it challenging for you to find the board members you need? Give time, yeah. What else? Mm-hmm. Anything else? Everyone is busy. Yep. Mm-hmm. So can we at least agree it's competitive? Can we agree with that? Yep. So one thing that I'm going to post, just show of hands, who's familiar with EPIC, that EPIC group out of the Regional Chamber of Commerce? No, if not, we'll get you connected. So EPIC is the Chamber's solution to the young, what is it?
Young professionals?
Right, but they, like, EPIC actually is an acronym for something, I can't remember, but like they're invested in community. So
like,
anyway.
Is it like a leadership development program?
Yeah, I mean, it's more like civic-minded community, and it's a really engaged group. So over the years, they've had the board fair. And then so you as a nonprofit can go and set up a table, and then these potential board members actually visit you at your table. Some of you may have participated. Then they rebranded it to Board Palooza. I guess Board Fair wasn't sexy enough. Well, of course, we can't go to a country club and move around a room together. So I'm going to post this. If you haven't seen it, they're offering a service this year called Epic Matchmaker. And you can fill out an application for your group, and someone is manually going to try and match you with people they have in their membership. Oh, somebody's had success with the Epic Board Fair.
I have two.
Yeah, we promote it because we think it's a great thing for people to participate in, organizations. But this time, I think that there's even a higher probability of you getting some matches, because it's not dependent on the person stopping at your table. Like, it's not going to be as hit and miss. Now, it's going to be incumbent on you to know who you're looking for and be able to effectively describe that in this application. So it is about setting expectations. Like, if you have board meetings every other month, don't be apologetic. That's what your ask is. If you have a standing rule that there's fundraising involved, don't apologize. Like, don't try to massage to what you think they might want. You really put what you want out there, and someone is manually, or a team of people, I guess, are going to manually look at everything that the organization's put in and everything that the participants, the potential board members, and they're going to start matchmaking for you. I think that's a pretty cool opportunity.
If I could throw in one of the problems and what has resulted perhaps in this real challenge we have about diversity is that we often continue to only go to the same well over and over again. We often go to our same friends over and over again, and we end up with boards that look the same way. They never change, and that is something that we in the charitable sector need to think about doing differently. What is it that, what are the barriers that stand in the way of diverse people getting to these kinds of job fairs? Do they not feel welcome? Have they even been invited? Taking the extra step, talking through this sort of thing with community members about, I know that you have a pretty significant Latino community up in Toledo. Do you have representatives from that community? There are gifts to be had with the people who are parts of these communities that my white brothers and sisters are often prone to overlook, and it is to our detriment to do so. We are lesser because of that. And so we need to make an extra effort to think through strategically how we can recruit people that look different from us in all sorts of ways and may think differently than us and have different experiences. And so that's on us to do. And it may change the way that we build boards in the future, and it may create happier stories for all of us.
So it feels like break time. What do you think, Beth? Short break?
That'd be great.
Okay, so at least according to Verizon, it's 2:52. How about we meet back up at 3 o'clock, stretch your legs, walk around, get a drink, do whatever nature calls, and we will be back here at 3. Okay, if you're here but you don't have your video on, can you at least turn your microphones off so I can see who's here and who isn't? Great. Okay. All right, I am sharing a PDF through the chat box. If you can please open that and make sure, if you can't open it, can you please tell me that in the chat box? Beth? Oh, I was going to say, is your microphone on?
Now it is, but I like to talk to myself, so that was a good warm-up. Okay. So here's what we were hoping to do is I have this file contains various story problems about scenarios that might come up in a charity. And we were going to split you into groups, and in your group ask you to discuss what some of the issues are that if you were a board member you'd want to be paying attention to in each of these scenarios. And so we were going to split you into two groups, and we were going to ask one group to do the even numbered questions and another group to do the odd numbered questions, and then we can come back together and have you read your scenario and share what you identified as issues. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, so if maybe you want to pick out your favorite problems instead of worrying about getting to all of them. And so I also don't know who the groups are going to end up being. So because I have a sister-in-law named April, how about whatever group you end up being in, you take the odd number questions. And then if you're in a group that doesn't have April, then you're going to take the even number questions, okay? And read them aloud. I'm guessing that Heather is emailing them in case they don't come through. If you can't,
Robin, did you get yours, Robin?
Yes, I got it now. I have my iPad on my left and my laptop on my right, so I'm good.
You are a power tech woman.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but
aren't we all? Isn't it funny how we're all learning new things that we didn't even know existed? So if you're with April, you're going to do the odd number ones. And if you're not with April, you're going to do the other ones. And so we'll probably only share 2 to 3 from each group. So each group will have 4 to consider. So pick your favorite one, and then we'll share it and discuss when y'all get back. And let's take...
One quick question. Danielle, can you type your email address into the message box, please? I can't find it quickly in my files. I don't want to hold everybody up. Sorry, go ahead, Beth.
There she's very fast.
It is. Okay.
So let's take about, it's 3:06. Let's take 15 minutes and you work in your groups and see what you come back up with. And at 3:22, we'll come back and start sharing. How's that?
Okay, Danielle, if you don't get this, I sent it. Just let me know in the chat box, okay? And are we ready for another Portkey experience? No, I'm just kidding. I've got this figured out. All right, so I'm opening all the rooms. Okay, so you solved all the problems of the world in your breakout rooms, right?
Yay.
Yeah, you guys are good.
Well, let's hear from April's group. I'm going to think of my mother-in-law, but my mother-in-law also gave me 2 perfect nieces and a nephew who I adore. So, but she didn't like them spending too much time with Aunt Beth because she said that it took her days to reprogram them after they'd spent time with me, because spoiling them was my favorite thing to do.
I can't imagine that.
Yeah, exactly. So we got our other group back. So I don't know who wants to speak for group odd numbers, but could you pick one of your cases and read it and tell us what you came up with?
Erin, do you want to share number 7? Because I liked the example that you gave. I mean, for one of the reasons that I was interested in this, I think that was like the perfect example of, this training anyway. Would you mind sharing your...
Sure.
That's awesome.
Thanks, April. So the scenario was, you've just agreed to be on the board of a local charity, but you're feeling pretty overwhelmed. What might be some things you could do to prepare to be an active board member? And I had mentioned in our group that it looks like I'm about to join a board that I'll be effective in January. And so I've met with the executive director, I met with the board chair. My intention is to volunteer with the organization. I already have experience with and care for the organization. I wanted to make sure that I was clear as to how I could contribute and how I wanted to contribute, because there's some areas that I may have some skill set, but I'm not choosing to volunteer my time to do that. And then there are other areas where, say with the previous organization, I said, this is an area where I don't have deep knowledge, but I am interested in using this as an opportunity for myself to grow in this area. So just sort of being clear about what you're willing to donate, and creating also some boundaries. So for example, I'm leading heavily involved with a capital campaign or a large fundraising campaign. And I need to make sure that I'm clear as to I won't be able to play a significant role in fundraising for this new organization. So just being sort of clear as to what your boundaries are, what you want to do, and I don't know what else I said, April and Danielle, but and then April, you were talking a little bit about from the other end, from being involved within the organization as a staff perspective, how you're put in like what your role is, and there's sometimes some blurring of some of those boundaries. And
that's why I liked your example a lot, because I feel that that's one thing that the board that I work for has the opportunity to get better in, is that the onboarding process is nothing like that. And as a matter of fact, myself and another staff person kind of will go out and find, like when we know that term limits are coming up, we'll go out and kind of recruit people that we think would be a good fit, where normally that really wouldn't fall, on our shoulders, but we do it. And then onboarding again is kind of like us doing that. And, there isn't a lot of like board training, or the committee for organizational development isn't very strong. And so I think where I'd like to see it go is exactly what Erin described, whereas someone is months in advance taking an interest, and then they're able to meet with me and the board and come to several meetings and then align with like where they want to serve, instead of kind of just like, okay, who wants to be on what committee this year? And then you're kind of like, okay, well, no one volunteered for this committee. Can you just be on it? And then it's not active. No one does anything with it. So I kind of see that side of it. So that's why I was like, oh, Erin's example is like the perfect of how it really should work, in my opinion, for what I would like to see my board do.
And how it ought to feel, because it sounds to me, Erin, as if you felt that you had an outlet to express these limitations that you felt, and that someone was listening and understanding and honoring it, so that you don't have to feel like a jerk when you step away from, doing something that's like, I told you before, this is going to be problematic for me. Right. And so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and two of the things we talked about is that the scenario was talking about joining a board when you may be feeling a bit overwhelmed, and really having a chance to query the board chair and the executive director to see, are they engaged? And as we said, there are various definitions of that, but are people contributing in a way that it's not when you join a board that suddenly there are three of you trying to do the work of 10. And so you want to make sure that people are sort of contributing in a way that feels equitable in some way. And then also one of the questions I asked was about, is the board reflective of the community we're serving, as well as the larger community, across different things related to age, related to race, and as well as LGBTQIA. I mean, really trying to reflect, because I said otherwise I'm not the best person. We want to find some other folks, but thankfully they had already sought out and already had representation. So I felt comfortable feeling, that I felt comfortable joining the board. So.
And asking to see copies of minutes from the last couple of meetings can give you a real flavor.
So that's good. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that can give you a real flavor for how the organization actually operates, how organized they are. And, that could be something that you put in a packet when you're like sitting down to talk about people, to give them an idea of that, you know, the board seems to take it seriously and run in an organized fashion, and they take their job seriously. The other thing I want to throw out there is, you know, some of this is like we might be treating staff members that we are trying to acclimate through an orientation process. There's no reason you can't make your board orientation process also somewhat fun, and it creates an opportunity for them to get out and meet different people, including fellow board members. And so in the past, I've done things like a passport that they had to complete before the next board meeting, where, you know, they would spend X amount of time talking to so-and-so. They had to go to, you know, one of these kinds of programs and that sort of thing. And when they successfully completed their passport, then they were presented some lovely tchotchke that has the logo of the organization on it. So it just becomes kind of a symbolic way. And you can also do that actually with ongoing board development and learning issues. Someone talked about that, I can't remember, but having assignments. So this is a terrible confession, but I've often created work for board members to do that wasn't necessarily critical, but I wanted them to feel engaged, as if their expertise was valued. It wasn't a waste of time, but it was trying to be very strategic about ensuring their buy-in. Like I wanted their involvement so they felt far more invested. And there were other outcomes from that too, but be mindful of thinking about whether that could be something that's helpful, if anyone knows what I mean, because it sounds kind of like a slimy thing to do, but all were happy in the long run. Okay, how about our even group? What was your favorite issue that you had conversation about? Who was in the...
Well, I'm not sure we had a favorite. Kelly, what do you think about favorites? We talked about a couple of them, Beth.
Okay.
We started with number 2, which was the food pantry one, where the secretary was handling the financial issues for the pantry, the church, and serving as the board treasurer. First of all, we're going to assume that the secretary is a paid position. It doesn't say that in here. For the church, yeah. Mm-hmm. So it really, it's definitely a conflict of interest for a paid person to be on the board, be serving as a board treasurer too.
Okay. Well, actually, in this case, she was a paid staff member of one of the supporting churches. She was not paid by the pantry, but she was the church's. This actually is a real case. So let's hear what
you said that. Isn't this the one you were referred to before, Beth?
Yes. No?
Yeah. Okay. All right. I said I think Charity.
You've been to some of my other trainings.
Yeah, I did this morning. So definitely separation of duties. We talked about that. You know, that's a must. It needs to be laid out a little bit. I mean, I know that at NAMI we've got not necessarily something written down about the acknowledgments. We have a process, but we don't have it in writing. But certainly handling finances and who handles checks and who does deposits and who sees that check and who checks that and who looks at that and all that. So definitely we talked about that. And we talked a little bit about an acknowledgement process. Kelly, you want to jump in? Go right ahead.
Well, if it was a case of the check getting lost, so to speak, and that they weren't following protocol of if something had been set up about who should do acknowledgments, all right? Then like here I am in here with our development director. I mean, I know it was a tiny operation, but still just having something in place, who would be acknowledging donations, right? How soon after it's received, everything, the industry standard is like 3 days, they say. But so that was mentioned.
Let me tell you about this real case. And this was a case involving the Grove City Food Pantry. The Grove City Food Pantry was created decades ago, very common ecumenical model in which probably 15 different churches supported the creation of this. Each of those churches sent someone to serve on the board. One church sent the board their paid secretary to serve on the board, and she served as the treasurer of the pantry, and the church allowed her on the clock for the church to do whatever was needed to help out the charity in terms of handling accounts payable, accounts receivable, stuff like that. She was with them for years, and there were a number of people who were very close in that board. But what these folks did not know is many times their very close friend, this church secretary, they sometimes would give, like many pantries do, emergency service checks. So someone comes in and they have a need for a prescription that they need to be filled, but they don't have the money, so maybe the pantry writes a check to cover the cost of that medication. Could be for utilities, something like that. So this board, at every board meeting, got a copy with a printout of every check that was written. So every check, so they ended up at every board meeting looking through a handout that had a picture of every check written by on the checking account. And they would then ask questions. Well, what about Miller Flooring? Why did we write a check to Miller Flooring? Well, did you notice that the tiling around the drainage units for the freezers, we fixed the cracked tiles? Oh, I did see that. Okay. They asked questions. They were doing a great job with that. What they didn't know is this friend, their church secretary, would often write the payee on the check in pencil, make the copy, and then rewrite the check payable to her. She stole over $200,000 from the food pantry over the course of like 5 years, and she was sentenced to a 14-year prison sentence in federal prison because the Secret Service is who investigates fraudulent check stuff. So it's a federal criminal offense. So there's a couple of things that charity could have been doing that would have made that more impossible. One, the biggest one is having multiple people involved in the financial activities. No one else ever reconciled the bank accounts. If so, they would have seen where the money went. The other thing is they could have thought about having double signature policy where at least two people are signing off on, yes, this looks like a legitimate expenditure based on what we do. This looks like a reasonable price. I'll sign off on that. All the documents are attached. Oh, this is a check for Victoria's Secret. Not so sure. I'll sign off. So these are the kinds of internal control practices that charities have to have. And that group made the biggest mistake is that they trusted her. And so that ends up having sometimes a really steep cost. And so don't be that group.
A lot of times the auditors will, make sure that you've got the right internal control procedures in place on paper. Now, whether they happen actually in practice, that's a whole different story, but they should have them.
So when I do my in-person trainings and we talk about some of these cases, I'll ask the group, like, what are some things that pantry should have had in place that might have prevented this? And people will often say an audit. But the prime purpose of an audit is not to discover fraud. The prime purpose of an audit is to ensure that the financial statements are a fair representation of the financial position of the company or the organization. They often will look at internal controls, but in national data, fraud is discovered through audits only this often. It's a very low percentage of the time when fraud is going on and it's discovered that it's through the audit that happens. The biggest source of discovering fraud is through whistleblowers, someone who becomes aware of what they're doing. So audits don't automatically buy you the kind of protection that you need to make sure you have by investing in internal controls.
But they do give you a guideline for internal controls. I mean, a good auditor will take a look at that and say, okay, yes, this procedure makes sense for this organization. I mean, I like I said, in practice, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be protected from fraud, but
now you can augment your letter of engagement that you have with a CPA firm who's doing an audit to include a specific review of your internal controls and any fraudulent behaviors. But that's an extra
charge, probably.
Yes, an extra charge and an extra set of checks and balances that they will go through that is not part of the ordinary approach they use. So audits don't buy you a clean bill of health on your financial operations necessarily. And so don't be that food pantry. Okay, let's go. Do we have the April group? Can we have another case and what you came up with?
I closed that document. Hold on, I have to open it back up to remind myself. Sorry.
And Jen, you'll, oh wait, we need to be able to read it because you aren't able. Let me pull it up too.
I wrote down little notes of what it was. I can't read it word for word.
Well, what was your example about, and I can read it?
It's the local pantry where a board member is approached by a telemarketer.
Okay. I can read it to you. I have the answers right here. Here we go. You're on the board of a local food pantry, and times have been tough for the organization and its clients. A community member comes to you and offers to run a telemarketing campaign on behalf of your organization. What are some things to consider? Go.
Considering how much they're going to take out of the donations for themselves and considering what they're going to do with the donor list after they're done. If they're going to sell it or if they're going to keep it confidential.
Anything else?
One of the concerns we had with this, they would be representing the organization, and do they know that? Do they know the organization well? And is that how we want to be soliciting funds, in the sense that often then just you get, if say this person was, or this organization was able to solicit funds, it's unlikely that they'll be able to do it as that they're going to be ongoing donors. It's one-off donors, and our intention is to have more ongoing relationships with our donors.
Good, good. This came from someone that's done some fundraising in the past. So first thing is, if you're hiring a professional solicitor, they better be a registered solicitor in the state of Ohio. They have to be bonded. They have to do annual filings with us. You can find the list of all properly registered solicitors in Ohio on our webpage. I would call other charities that may have worked with them to see what their experience was. I would ask if they've ever been disciplined by a state regulator. You will have a contract that should outline very clearly how the campaign is going to be handled, what expenses you're going to have to pay. These people are representing your organization in the community. You need to be intimately involved with the scripts or what it is that they're providing as information. They are the charity to the folks that they are contacting, if that's through telemarketing. So make sure you're well aware of that. And Aaron raised the question about, are these going to be folks that you want to develop an ongoing relationship with? This is someone who's done some thought about fundraising things. So for instance, when I worked for the American Cancer Society, they hired professional solicitors for very narrowly defined campaigns. They wanted to find first-time donors who had never before given to the American Cancer Society. That is a hard job because most people have a Boy Scout neighbor who's been on a Relay for Life team and they've written a $10 check check to Johnny's Relay for Life team. So this is a very expensive undertaking. It would be expensive if they did this in-house, and it is expensive when they hire a professional solicitor. So they may only get 1% back from what is raised. And that's not an unusual number for what some charities get in telemarketing campaigns. But they're okay with that 1% campaign, meaning 99% of the proceeds will be a fundraising expense, because they are going to build an ongoing relationship with each person that comes in the door through that solicitation, and they will build them into regular donors to the American Cancer Society, as opposed to some groups that all they do is all fundraising through a professional solicitor. They're not building relationships at all, and so there's very high costs involved in doing that, and relatively smaller amounts of a donor's gift get used for the ultimate project. The other thing that the American Cancer Society has in its favor, so they still will have a respectable percent on program service expenses, because that 1% campaign is a very small part of their fundraising portfolio. So they can afford a very expensive one without it making it look really bad on their numbers, because they have a number of other ways that they raise funds in a far more effective way. So make sure that people are following the rules, the laws. Make sure you know what you're getting into before you get into contracts with professional solicitors. There are some very good business-based reasons why you might want to use a professional solicitor, but you better understand it and know what you're getting into and what impact that's going to have on what your communities think about your group. Anyone have anything they want to add to that? Okay. So let's take one more then from the even-numbered group.
I think I'm it, Beth, because I think nobody else could pull up the...
Well, you were just the all-star then. Go.
I guess so. Heather, you saved the day. Okay, so let's go with number 4. You are on the board of a charity that provides care and counseling to individuals with chronic illnesses. An employee contacts you expressing concerns that staff members are stealing from the organization and that management won't investigate. What would be some things to consider? Well, this is bizarre, because as the manager, I can't imagine not investigating something like that. But I know at NAMI we have a procedure in place for, going to your supervisor. Kelly and I both talked about this, because I know the Warner Center has the same thing. If you have a concern about something that's going on, and then if if you don't get anywhere with the supervisor, then maybe move up the food chain, to the director or their supervisor or whatnot. We also have a way for, even though we discourage staff members from contacting board members directly, because that gets very murky, and I've had that happen on a number of occasions over the years, and it really never works. It never ends well, really doesn't, especially for the staff member. But they are able to write an email. They are able to, contact them, in a different way without calling them or meeting with them. Kelly, do you have anything to add to that? I didn't take any notes, so.
Kelly actually stepped away.
Okay, Patty. Do you remember if we talked about anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think the emphasis was on having a policy in place where somebody can go up the ladder, and if they hit the top and have no response, then where else can they go?
Right.
Sometimes, and we see this sadly, even in the Toledo area, there have been executive directors who are the ones who are committing the fraud. And the executive director may be the one who scares everybody out of raising questions, because they fire people if they have questions. So that becomes a real delicate balance. And that's why, as a board member, you do want to make sure that there's some path that staff members know that they can use to express grave concerns about what's going on. And, you know, staff members at charities are often very passionate about the work they do. Often it's not for great levels of pay, it's because it touches their heart. And so these are people that are often passionate about the work, and it breaks their heart to see someone harming it. And they care about the clients that are served, that sort of thing. So that's why the 1-800 phone in a fraudster is a very popular approach that some larger organizations use, both charitable organizations and healthcare groups, that sort of thing, where there's an outside entity in which staff members are free to contact. So yes, someone has shared that if there's a concern with the ED, then the board president would be the next contact, unless that happens to be the executive director's sister, and then that gets a little bit crazy too. So just like we talked about before, how you know, the human condition and human relationships, there's not a textbook on how to do it. When you're on the board, you want to learn as soon as possible if there is fraud taking place, because you want to shut off that leak. So just make sure that there's a pathway if people run into problems. So Heather, I think that unless someone wants to throw out, like if you were just so inspired by one of the other two cases that you think it's worth throwing out, feel free to do that. But maybe just for these last few minutes we have together, you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, the legal and fiduciary obligations that board members and key staff members and even volunteers have to the organization. And some of that is pretty cut and dried. And, but we've also talked about kind of the human dynamic, which is not nearly as predictable, or there's not easy answers. And they're both tricky at times, and they require thought and work and effort. And ideally, it's all worth it in the long run, because you end up with a healthy give and take and a balance, and, you know, knowing that people are keeping their eyes on the prize and committed to, you know, whatever the mission is, and making sure that it's done well on behalf of the people that rely on your organization for services. That's what it's all about. And we all may have different opinions about, you know, unfortunately, one time I was doing a training and there was a pastor there, and we're talking about things that sometimes divert people's attention. And he shared that, yes, the most important issue that they had to deal with in their church was what color the fellowship hall carpeting should be. You know, and like there was a big contingency that thought it should be green and another one red. And they spent hours, you know, arguing over this very important thing that really, you know, speaks to who they are as a community. So that's also part of the human nature that we all have. So, you know, always remember that we're keeping our eyes on the prize and trying to do in the long run what most helps the organization, and even more importantly, the people that rely on it. So you all have suffered through hours and hours on Zoom today, and I'm appreciative of your willingness to do that, because it shows a level of commitment and concern for groups that you're involved with. And so I express my absolute respect for the work that you do, and I wish you nothing but success in the groups that you're involved with. I gave earlier my contact information in the Attorney General's office, beth.short@ohioattorneygeneral.gov. While we can't give you legal advice, we can try to point you in the right direction should something come up, or if you have suggestions for information that would be helpful to share with other charitable leaders, we would love to be able to do that. So again, I also cannot overstate how much of a fan I am of the Toledo Foundation Center that you have there, and most particularly Heather. This activity does not go on elsewhere in the state of Ohio. I often brag about the great things and the real strategic approach that's being used to look at the needs of the community and the needs of organizations to figure out how you can make the world better for folks that live up in your part of the state. And that's a gift. So I look forward always to the chance to work with Heather and come up. And I can't wait till we can travel and get out of our houses so I can come up and maybe see some of you in person. So
thank you very much for participating. And Beth, as always, it's a pleasure to have you visit the center. So thank you, everybody.